Camp Hearne, Texas. August 1944. The afternoon light had gone sharp at the edges, each fence post carving its own long shadow over the dust. A faint wind carried grit, the smell of pine tar from a nearby shed, and something sweeter that none of the prisoners could identify at first: chocolate. 6 German generals walked under escort toward a wooden barrack at the center of the compound. Their collars had long been stripped of silver, their hands rough from weeks of enforced idleness, but their pace remained practiced, slow, synchronized, full of ceremony even inside defeat. Beside them, an American sergeant carried a tattered crate, no larger than a field map, its lid marked with stenciled black letters, U.S Army K Ration Breakfast Unit. Inside the mess hut it was cooler. The ceiling fans hummed lazily, slicing dust motes into spirals. At a long table the guard set down the box, dragged a knife along the tape, and looked up. "Compliments of the quartermaster," he said. "Somebody requested to see what a U.S. soldier eats." The Germans gathered, skeptical brows lifting. They expected barrels of beans or loaves of white bread. Not these. Small, precise, factory-sealed cartons the color of dull olive. General Erich Heydrich, veteran of the Afrika Korps, tapped one with the back of his fingernail. "A child's lunch," he muttered. Another officer snorted. "This is the meal of the superpower, eh?" Laughter spread down the line, brittle and tired. A few guards chuckled with them. Embarrassment was rare in war. Heydrich lifted the lid, revealing waxed packets lined in perfect symmetry. Inside were biscuits, compressed meat, a chocolate bar stamped Nestlé, U.S. Army, powdered coffee, gum, even a folded piece of toilet paper. He sorted through it like a scientist examining a fossil, lips twisting. "Provisions of an engineer, not an army," he said. "They eat instructions." The Texan sergeant scratched a match against the crate and lit a folding camp stove. A blue flame jumped. "Let's see," he said, pouring canteen water into a tin cup and emptying the coffee packet with one quick flick. The smell drifted instantly real beans, roasted deep, nothing ersatz or rationed about it. The men went quiet. Even before it touched their lips, they could taste the abundance behind it. Ships, machines, rail networks, and factories all crammed invisibly into that rising steam. He poured a small cup for each man. They hesitated, then drank. Silence stretched. After a long swallow, Heydrich set the cup down slowly, expression unreadable. "This," he said at last, "does not taste like an enemy at war." The sergeant smiled. "Maybe that's why we keep winning." The laughter that followed was softer, uncertain. One general unfolded the instruction sheet tucked inside the carton and read aloud. "Created by the Subsistence Research Laboratory, Chicago, Illinois." He raised the thin paper between his fingers and muttered almost admiringly, "They mobilize scientists for sandwiches." On the far wall, a chalk list marked upcoming talks for enemy officers, cultural exchange. Below it, a poster showed a soldier eating from the same little box under the slogan, "Fuel for Victory." It looked faintly ridiculous until the officers realized the genius inside the joke. A meal no larger than a book now replaced entire supply columns. Calories could cross oceans in cardboard instead of convoys. The mechanics of empire had been shrunk to fit in a man's backpack. When they left the hall, the heat outside smelled even leaner for comparison. The generals said little, each replaying the taste of real coffee that would not leave his tongue. Heydrich walked slowest, the empty carton tucked under his arm, like evidence. His aide glanced over and whispered in German, "We can copy it." The old officer shook his head. "No," he said. "They built it to scale. We built ours to starve. Expectation mockery of the lazy American ration had melted into something closer to awe." Behind that simple meal, the captured officers glimpsed the real secret of their opponent's strength, discipline worn as practicality and the luxury of never going hungry. The small olive carton that stunned those German generals was born far from the front lines inside a Chicago laboratory filled with clipboards rather than rifles. In the early months of 1941, before America had even entered the war, Army nutritionists, engineers, and packaging experts gathered under the austere name Subsistence Research Laboratory. Their task: feed an army that could appear anywhere on Earth and fight for days with no kitchen behind it. The solution had to be light enough for a man to carry, strong enough to endure jungle moisture or desert heat, and balanced enough to keep his muscles from collapsing under endless miles of marching. Major Ansel Keys, a physiologist from the University of Minnesota, ran the project. He believed victory would depend as much on calories as courage. By 1942, his prototype box, labeled K Ration, after his own initial, passed its first field tests with paratroopers, commandos, and flyers. It contained slightly less than a day's food ration, but compacted every essential nutrient into a 32-ounce cube of freedom. Each carton held breakfast, lunch, or supper units packed with canned meat, biscuits, soluble coffee, powdered lemon drink, a bar of chocolate or hard candy, sugar tablets, and 4 cigarettes. Even the wax paper could serve as kindling or rain shield. It was the meal of mobility. Within a year, assembly lines in multiple states were churning out 100 million of them per month. Machines folded cardboard with the precision of artillery factories. Women workers in kerchiefs sealed cans while stenciled stamps announced destinations on every continent. The U.S. Quartermaster Corps taught soldiers to live on those boxes as naturally as on oxygen. Training films declared, "A K ration in the chow bag means no halt to warfare." The slogan wasn't poetry, it was policy. Rations had always been military instruments, but America industrialized the concept until it became indistinguishable from ammunition. A simple meal stabilized morale, reduced transport tonnage, and freed armies from the long chains of field kitchens that had anchored European warfare for centuries. When Operation Husky invaded Sicily in 1943, tens of thousands of troops carried their entire dietary independence in neat paper tiers stacked inside landing crafts. Wherever a man could walk, he could fight, and that turned battle into geometry rather than geography. Germany's system remained medieval by comparison. Front-line troops survived on iron rations, bread, tinned meat, ersatz coffee made from roasted barley, intended for one emergency day, but often stretched across a week. Every morning the same improvisations repeated, burning fuel to bake bread, scrounging livestock from terrified civilians, boiling potatoes over useless maps. The American soldier, meanwhile, might open his cardboard cube under mortar fire and within 2 minutes swallow hot soup. The contrast demoralized as surely as defeat in the field. When captured German officers began arriving in American hands, understanding that meal became a kind of psychology lesson. Interrogators noticed that prisoners scoffed at the size of the ration before finding its perfection. Each box represented something the Third Reich could never replicate: an industrial democracy that fed everyone equally, from private to general. Behind it stood not charisma, but system. Farm networks extending from Kansas to California, refrigerated trains timed to the hour, scientists designing sustenance as methodically as weapons. Efficiency had replaced ideology. The generals' laughter faded the instant they realized that all of it, from powdered coffee to wax wrapping, proved a unity of purpose stronger than any anthem. For American guards, K rations were ordinary. They joked about the monotony, the perpetual cheese, the eternal biscuits. For European eyes, accustomed to hierarchy and scarcity, it looked like utopia, in cardboard a democracy of nourishment. Each identical box reduced rank as much as hunger. The general and the laborer ate the same. That equality, more than the food itself, disturbed traditional soldiers raised on privilege. At Camp Hearne, The ritual of unpacking one became an impromptu lecture in logistics. When guards brewed coffee from powder in a minute, it was not just chemistry. It was proof of what continental tyranny could never produce: supply without suffering. If an army could mechanize mercy, what else could it mechanize? The answer echoed every time another plane landed at a forward strip carrying pallets of neat rectangles, America's edible argument. By 1944, the little K Ration had become a global symbol, the box that marched. Its design appeared in propaganda photos alongside grinning GIs leaning on jeeps. But to men like General Heydrich, that grin was no longer arrogance. It was the calm of a soldier who knew he would never go hungry no matter where fate dropped him. In war, that certainty was as lethal as any gun. At first, curiosity turned to competition. The German generals could not let a humble food box stand as a symbol of defeat. After that first sampling in the Texas heat, they asked to examine the soldiers themselves who ate these factory meals. The Americans obliged. A week later, 3 U.S. soldiers from the local quartermaster detail visited the camp. They were lean, cheerful, and visibly strong from the sun. The guards emptied their gear for display: rifles, helmets, rucksack, and a stack of K rations bound by a single strap. Private Nash, a small man with the accent of the Midwest, opened one and said matter-of-factly, "Breakfast." He tore off the waxed paper as if unwrapping civilization. In less than a minute, the coffee was hot, the biscuits crisp, the canned cheese spread warming against the metal tin. "Fast food before it had a name," the translator quipped. The prisoners watched the steam rising from the tiny cup, the soldier's relaxed confidence as he ate. It was obvious he thought nothing special of it. That indifference galled them most. "Your men," General Heydrich whispered in German, "treat abundance as normal." Another answered, "And that is the definition of empire." To test the point, one German officer asked the Americans to let his own cook prepare a standard Wehrmacht field ration for contrast. The request was granted. By noon, 2 small camp stoves faced each other on the mess hall porch, one heating the K ration coffee, the other frying a thin slice of horse meat salvaged from a surplus shipment. The difference in sound alone carried the verdict: one hissed calm efficiency, the other sputtered like desperation. When the German cook served his portion, the Americans offered equal shares, insisting on fairness. Both sides tasted each other's food. The Germans conceded quietly. Even cold, the K ration was better. The Americans pretended not to notice how fast their guests finished the biscuits. Days later, camp censors intercepted telegram drafts destined for German families. Each followed the same tone. "We have seen how they feed their soldiers something unimaginable," one wrote. Another, "Their discipline is mechanical but merciful." The irony struck the American interpreters. Food had achieved what months of propaganda never could. One guard said, "They finally believe we're human." He was half right. The truth went deeper. The generals no longer saw America as naive. They saw it as unstoppable. By the 3rd week, the mockery was gone. Officers began keeping the empty cartons, folding them flat with the tidy care of archivists. Some used them to draft notes or diagrams. Others collected the printed menus, remarking on their practicality. WWII, one of the more skeptical generals, remarked one evening, "In Berlin we built monuments to ideology. Here they build lunch boxes and win wars with them." That night, the captain commanding the guards overheard their conversation through an open window. "Gentlemen," one POW said, "we have been conquered by cardboard." The others laughed, but it was the laughter of respect, not ridicule. During a later inspection, they were shown an entire supply car filled with K rations, tens of thousands stacked like precise bricks from floor to ceiling, each stamped with the day's date. An officer from the Quartermaster Corps explained, "We shipped them by color code. green for tropical zones, blue for winter, yellow for training bases. We change recipes by season. He opened one labeled Winter, Ham, and Eggs. The prisoners leaned close to watch. Inside lay the same standardized miracle, different flavor, same certainty. "You feed an army this way," Vogti began, trailing off. The American finished for him. "And you never lose one to starvation again." The realization crawled through them like slow fire. Nothing mystical powered America. No divine right, no singular leader, just countless machines agreeing on schedule steel, rail, factory, stove, all striking the hour together until war became math. Even the guards felt the shift. A corporal wrote in his diary, "The Jerry stopped sneering today. They asked for seconds, and I gave it. They thanked me properly." The cameras used for local propaganda caught bits of it, still frames of German uniforms eating with composure. American guards leaning on rifles, both sides joined by the universal gesture of spoon to mouth. The Geneva Conventions had required humane treatment. The Americans had gone further, weaponizing normalcy itself. To the prisoners, each efficient meal tasted like a verdict. The same small comfort reaching a soldier on Saipan, another in Belgium, and now men in captivity in Texas, proof that democracy functioned as an ecosystem. As weeks turned, the generals debated endlessly in their barracks. One wrote, "It is not their weapons we feared, but their distribution of hope." Another corrected him, "It is their faith that the ordinary will suffice." They began to see the American soldier as the truest reflection of his food, practical, modest, predictable, and inexhaustible. By now, mockery had transformed into admiration and finally alarm. If simple nourishment could be produced in such volume, what other miracles of organization waited unseen? The rations had stopped being lunch, they had become symbols of a world built on equal portions, where no man's hunger excused cruelty. When the war's thunder finally subsided, the silence sounded strange, like an engine shutting off after years of labor. One by one, the camps emptied. By 1946, the German generals boarded ships at Houston, bound for the ruins of a nation that once claimed efficiency as its birthright. They carried no trophies, only folded uniforms and memory. More than one slipped a flattened K Ration carton into his coat, a keepsake from that humid Texas summer when common food had changed their understanding of conquest. The ship docked in Bremerhaven to the smell of coal smoke and decay. Rubble stretched to horizons, warehouses gutted, kitchens blackened. Civilians rationed watery soup and bitter substitute coffee brewed from burnt barley. It was all familiar yet foreign to men who had just lived months among enemies who fed them better than their homeland could feed her children. General Heydrich stood on the pier staring at soot clouds and said quietly, "They beat us with banality." A journalist within earshot recorded the remark. It outlived them all. Soon after repatriation, Allied occupation authorities requested written evaluations from returning POW officers. Most replies were curt, a few were startling. One captured memo, later archived as Condition of U.S. Internment Facilities, contained a single observation typed in stiff German script. "Their strength lies in breakfast." Another noted, "The American Army proved that plenty is civilization." We lost because we could not feed ourselves decently. Historians would debate whether those lines were lament or admiration, but none doubted their sincerity. Some of the men returned to civilian life, seeking purpose amidst ash. Heydrich lectured briefly at a technical university, teaching logistics to young Germans raised under occupation. He brought to class a small prop, a replica of the K Ration. Setting it on the desk, he told students, "This box explains the 20th century. It is a democracy reduced to calories, nothing wasted, nothing hoarded." He described how every soldier, whether general or private, ate identically. "That," he said, is how equality wins wars. In the years that followed, West Germany's economic planners rebuilt supply chains with those lessons absorbed, consciously or not. Products would be standardized, packaging simplified, process given priority over pomp. A tiny square of American cardboard had shown them the silent geometry of prosperity. In the U.S., the story disappeared into warehouses of history. The rations themselves became surplus stock auctions and, later, collector's items. Surviving footage of guards explaining the boxes to bewildered Germans reemerged only decades later in a forgotten Signal Corps reel. Its title card read simply, "Field Demonstration, Camp Hearne, 1944." Grainy film showed uniformed men gathered under shade cloths, the exact moment laughter gave way to still wonder. Between flickers, one sees a general raise his cup as if in uninvited salute. For those Americans, feeding a prisoner decently required no heroism, it was policy. Humanity had been written into a ration schedule. In retrospect, that may have been democracy's quiet victory, correctness without cruelty, abundance without bragging. By the 1950s, visitors to cautious new West German canteens found familiar inventions, portion packs, disposable cups, instant coffee sachets. No one cited the U.S. Army, but the echo was unmistakable. Progress smelled faintly of powdered eggs and soluble caffeine. In the archives of a Hamburg newspaper, one old officer's obituary contained a single peculiar line: "He never drank ersatz coffee again." What lingered was flavor as philosophy. To the men who had lived through both systems, food became the measure of ideals. The dictator's table demanded sacrifice. The democracy's lunchbox delivered enough for all. That, they concluded, was the real revolution of the industrial age, not its bombs or tanks, but its confidence that feeding ordinary men properly was the foundation of national strength. In a war defined by starvation and ruin, the K Ration seemed almost trivial. Yet for those who held it, it was a revelation. The ingenuity of a nation that could package nourishment, morale, and mass production in one small cube of cardboard and faith. Two plain lessons endure from that improbable meeting between captor and captive. Civilization proves itself not by how widely it can destroy, but by how reliably it can feed. And sometimes the deadliest weapon an army can wield is the certainty that none of its soldiers or its principles will ever go hungry.